Hello, everyone, and welcome back to 305 Insights. I'm your host, Alan Somerton, and today's topic of discussion is the top five coaches under the most pressure heading into this 2026 season. Now, this is different from the hot seat because there's a clear indication that if performance fails, you'll be fired. Pressure is more of the weight of expectations. These could be successful coaches at their previous stops or even as recent as last year, but it's more of where the programs expect to be on a consistent basis and how the coach has delivered, whether it's been the last few years, one previous year, or just the general investment into the program causing expectations to soar at a level that they need to perform or else serious questions will be asked. Now, I know I just said it's a top five, but I do have an honorable mention, an OLI, if you will, outside looking in, and we're going to start with that. So the honorable mention is Kalen DeBoer out of Alabama. DeBoer just received a 7-year, $87.5 million extension that will basically average out to $12.5 million per year. Now, the buyout was increased, I believe, if he leaves for another job, and that's $10 million. If he's fired, Bama will owe up to 90% of the remaining contract with no offset if he gets a new job. Now, the offset part, it's basically double dipping. A lot of these schools try to get themselves out of these big contracts by having offset language. So let's say Jimbo Fisher is the best example. He signed a fully guaranteed $95 million contract. And I believe there was about 60 million or some odd when he got fired. Maybe 72 million, but somewhere around there. Even if he got another job, which he still hasn't, he would have been paid the 9.5 million a year that was owed, or whatever was owed per year by Texas A&M, plus whatever he was receiving from his current school. So let's say you have another coach, I don't know, like say Tom Herman. When he got fired and he got the job at FAU, whatever he earned at FAU was subtracted from what Texas owed him. That's the difference. If you have offset, your next job takes away from what the school that fired you owes you. No offset means you're getting paid no matter what. So essentially, Kalen DeBoer, if he's fired, he gets to double dip. Now, people wondering why Alabama did this. Bama clearly doesn't want to start another head coaching search because A, they believe Kalen DeBoer is the guy for the job, and B, more importantly, it's the perception. Firing him outside of a disastrous season will make the job less appealing for the next guy due to these expectations. DeBoer has won 20 games heading into year 3. However, if they fire him, if let's say another 9-4 season, who would really want the job? I get it's Alabama, right? DeBoer has decided to be the man who follows after Nick Saban. Would a Dan Lanning want to leave Oregon to go to Tuscaloosa with all the support he has in terms of NIL and the resources? Would someone like Sark want to go from Texas to Bama? And again, he has virtually unlimited resources at Texas, and he still hasn't been able to break through. Bama fans have this, again, if you've been a fan there for a long time, obviously you've seen a dynasty that we'll probably never see again. But they have to admit that things aren't going to be the same in this post-NIL era. There's a reason why Nick Saban retired at the time that he did. Now, we don't have to get into conspiracy theories or anything like that when it comes to why Saban left, but it's clear. The SEC, and I'm sure many schools across the country, but primarily in the SEC, NIL existed before NIL was official. You even have examples where there was a defensive end, a blue chip 4-star prospect where he had offers from Ohio State, Michigan, et cetera, and he decided to gracier, which means you forego a scholarship just to go to Alabama. Come on, man. You can go to any blue blood school and you decide to forego a scholarship to try and basically walk on in Alabama. Tua Tagovailoa's dad mysteriously gets to travel from Hawaii to Tuscaloosa. All these new signees all of a sudden have a nice Dodge Charger to drive around. Let's be real, folks. The SEC and the boosters have been communicating this for years. It's an open secret. But now that other teams can spend money legally, we've seen what's happened in the SEC. Specifically, we're starting to see it break down for Alabama. Year over year, they had the second overall recruiting class, but that was a lot of holdover from Nick Saban. And they've been top 10 ever since. But this year, they've fallen off. I believe as of last check, they were in the 40s or 50s in the overall rankings. Unfortunately, with the advent of NIL, people care less, families care less, kids care less about the brands and how much you can pay them. Again, if you're choosing between Alabama, Ohio State, Texas, Oregon, UM, and there's a difference in money, what's the difference between all those schools? DeBoer has inherited the same pressures from Saban in a completely different landscape. To me, the pressure is not coming internally, it's external pressure. The fan base wants a Nick Saban type season. And with the addition of a one more conference game, so the SEC has moved to a 9-game conference schedule, that makes it increasingly unlikely that Alabama can go back to these 1-loss seasons, 2-loss seasons, undefeated seasons. It's just not in the cards. The fans need to accept that. But it's going to be hard to change what they were accustomed to for well over a decade. At number 5, I have another individual from the SEC, and that's Shane Beamer out of South Carolina. Now, Beamer is a hot seat candidate as well, but I'm giving him credit for retaining talent for one last run. And I also believe, again, the athletic director, the administration, I think they believe he's the right guy for the job. They just need him to pull things together and have a productive season. Lenora Sellers, Dylan Stewart return at QB and defensive end. Nick Harbor is another huge piece that returns at wide receiver. These are all just uber athletes. And all three of them, if they were to leave, would probably be first-round picks. Harbor's kind of more of a wait-and-see type thing because the physical attributes are there, but the production hasn't necessarily been there. But if he has a good season this year, then people will definitely jump on the fact that this kid can produce at the next level. There seems to be about 5 wins in the schedule. You got Kent State, Towson, Mississippi State, Kentucky, Arkansas. If they put the final nail in the coffin for Dabo Swinney with the W versus Clemson, that's 6 wins. The remaining games are against Florida, Bama, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, and Georgia. Can you find maybe 1 or 2 more wins in there? Now, would 6 wins be enough based off of how much you had to pay to bring Lenore Sellers back, retain Dylan Stewart, retain Harbor? Beamer loves South Carolina. He believes that's a destination job. Does the administration think they have another gear in them? Again, Beamer was the one who recruited these guys. He's got a future QB on the roster already in Landon Duckworth. He retains talent. He recruits well. Can you beat Florida and get to 7 wins? Can you throw an upset against Tennessee? Bama, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, Georgia might be tough. You could pull it off, but again, it seems like there's 6 wins in there. 5 should be counted for sure, but you never know in college football. But can he get to the 7 wins and kind of quiet down the noise and then transition to the next batch of recruits that he got and see how they develop from there. At number 4, I got Dabo Sweeney out of Clemson. I was a few years early on the Dabo overhype train. I mean, once he signed that massive contract extension, I immediately said that was one of the worst contracts in college football history. But it seems like this is the final year for the fan base and for a lot of the national media to give a pass and assume Clemson is still a top tier school. I mean, last year, let's be honest, they were a trendy pick to make the playoffs and win the championship. There was multiple pundits who had them as the ACC favorites. It didn't happen. They finished unranked, 7-6. The issues of the new college football world have caught up to Dabo Sweeney. There's a lack of transfer portal additions and just sticking with these recruits that may or may not pan out. You can't be that stubborn. What used to be one of your greatest attributes that everybody used to stay, not just players, obviously, to prevent the transfers from sitting out a year and whatnot before the transfer portal, but you had coaches staying there for years and years and years. That's not the case anymore, unfortunately, whether you like it or not. And how did he respond this offseason? He fired Garrett Riley and brought back Chad Morris, who was part of the staff from 2011 to 2014. And he only brought in 2 offensive transfers, a wide receiver and a running back. The last time Clemson had a top 10 class for high school recruiting was in 2021 when it was the number 5 class. 2025 was number 31. 2026 was 21. There's not enough top tier talent come to Clemson as frequently as it once did. They're currently number 13 for 2027, but if the season falls apart, how much of that talent will stay? And how much of that talent is actually blue chip talent that can make a difference? This is a team that used to spit out defensive ends, defensive tackles, cornerbacks, wide receivers, running backs, QB, you name it, all the important positions. Clemson was producing NFL talent. And now, not so much. At number 3, I've got Lincoln Riley out of USC. The number 1 recruiting class. Gary Patterson is your new defensive coordinator and a returning veteran QB in Jaden Maivia. It's now or never for Riley in year 5. After starting off 11-3, Riley is 24-15 in the following 3 years. The Trojans had a solid 9-3 regular season before losing in the bowl game to TCU. But the Trojans didn't pay big money to average 5 losses over a 3-year stretch. The facilities have been upgraded. The program has been modernized. Now it's time for the results to show. However, if they go 9-3 again, they have a strong case to make the playoffs. But they need to be competitive in the games against Oregon, Ohio State, and Indiana. If you get blown out in those games, it's going to be rough to make this 12-team playoff. But if you're competitive and if you even pull off an upset in one of those games, I don't see how USC doesn't make the playoffs. Now, they just lost their center for the year. Do they have the experience to overcome such injuries? Yes, you have the number 1 recruiting class. Yes, you brought in some talent, but offensive line wasn't one of the areas where you could afford to lose bodies. Again, you have the veteran leadership. You've brought in talent. You've retained talent. Gary Patterson, again, hasn't coached in quite some time, but the architect of the 4-2-5 defense, can that spark more productivity out of the defense? Because unfortunately, that's always been the Achilles heel for a Lincoln Riley-led team. If USC has a competent to good defense, this is a dangerous team. And again, the big bucks were brought in to make USC a national power again. The recruiting's there, the talent's there, the results need to be on the field now, especially in an expanded playoff field. At number 2, I have Steve Sarkisian out of Texas. 3 straight 10-win seasons, and somehow it still feels like the Longhorns have been coming up short. It's year 2 of the Arch Manning era, and then you brought in Cam Coleman to play alongside Ryan Wingo and form one of the top tier wide receiver rooms in the country. You got continuity with 6'7" left tackle Trevor Gooseby, and you also got Brandon Baker and Connor Robertson coming back. You brought in transfers Raleek Brown out of Arizona State, Hollywood Smothers out of NC State, and Sark has all the weapons he needs to lead another high-powered offense. On the defensive side, transfer linebacker Rasheem Biles is one of the most disruptive linebackers in the nation. Colin Simmons, returning at defensive end, is a star and a guaranteed first-round pick outside of injury. He had 12 in sacks last year, and I expect the production to continue for Simmons. The Horns are strong at all levels of the defense. You're strong at safety, strong at cornerback. You got returning talent there. Does Will Muschamp make a difference compared to former defensive coordinator Pete Kwiatkowski? Might have butchered that name. I thought Pete did well, but again, they think that something was missing, it appears. The defense did slip from 2nd to 18th in defensive SP+, but will the change be worth it? Last time Muschamp was in charge of a top 10 defense was in 2014. Sark needs an SEC title. He needs a run in the college football playoff. He needs this to alleviate some of the noise around the program. It's year 6. The boosters have been writing a lot of checks. I don't want to say this is a super team, but the amount of talent that's on Texas is shocking. They need the results to go with it. To me, this is one of those make or break years for Sark retaining that reputation as an offensive savant. I haven't seen it enough, especially in the big moments. He almost seems a little too conservative with the type of talent that he has. Arch Manning, Cam Coleman, Ryan Wingo. Massive offensive line coming back. And in the weaknesses that you've had, you've shored it up. And again, on defense, like I said, you've got Simmons, you got McDonald at safety. You got Grayson at quarterback. There's a lot of young talent coming back. There's a lot of veteran leadership that's there. This needs to be the year that Texas puts it all together. Or else the questions start going to get loud about Sarkisian at Texas. At number 1, I have Lane Kiffin at LSU. He signs a 7-year, $91 million contract on top of the $54 million that was paid to Brian Kelly. Plus, the hiring or retentions of coordinators, LSU made decisions that are costing them over $162 million. No one in the fan base wants to hear about the schedule or settling in. With that type of money being thrown around, people are expecting titles from Lane Kiffin and company. Take into account the talent that was accumulated in the transfer portal. You got QB Sam Levitt out of Arizona State, left tackle Jordan Seaton out of Colorado. You got 3 wide receivers in Winston Watkins, Jace Brown, Eugene Wilson. And then you had plenty of defensive transfers at defensive end, linebacker, and safety. LSU, on paper, is one of the most complete teams in the nation. He also had a really solid high school recruiting class after coming in late. Cupcakes against Louisiana Tech and McNeese equals 2-0. You got Clemson, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Kentucky, Mississippi State, Auburn, Bama, Texas, Tennessee, and Arkansas. Clemson's game 1. I don't see how you don't come out of the gates firing on all cylinders, especially against a Clemson team that, as many times I've said, is on the downswing. You got to have the Ole Miss game just because of everything that went down against them. You got to have the Kentucky game, Mississippi State, Auburn, Tennessee, Arkansas should be winnables. The ones you have to worry about are A&M, Bama, and Texas. He needs to make the playoffs bare minimum and make some noise for LSU to feel good about this hire. There's a lot of hype around him. They spent a lot of money bringing him in, and they need results. The last time Kiffin was in a position like this was when he was at USC, and I know that was a long time ago, and we like to think that people have matured, et cetera, et cetera. But there wasn't a lot of pressure at Ole Miss. He could have been a legend if he stayed there winning 10 games every year. That's not going to cut it at LSU. Before Brian Kelly, the previous coaches had all won titles. Nick Saban won a title. Les Miles, for all his faults, won a title. Ed Orgeron won a title. This is what needs to happen with Lane Kiffin. There needs to be a title on the ledger before his 7 years are up. There needs to be multiple playoff appearances before those 7 years are up. That's it for today's episode, folks. Coming up next, we'll have the best hires of 2026, and then we'll start diving into the conference previews. The way that goes is the same as the previous years. We'll figure out the top tier teams, which means the teams I expect to be they're teams that I expect to make the playoffs and or compete for spots in the playoffs. And they're also pretty much primarily the teams I expect to see in the title game. So we're going to try and limit that to 2 teams and then per conference and then kind of go from there. We'll also talk about sleeper teams, teams in trouble, big games on the schedules for the conference, and the most impactful players. So that's what's on the horizon. And then after we get that done, we'll do the deep dive into UM and Florida State before the season starts. So that being said, you guys know the drill. You can find us on YouTube. Like, subscribe, comment on the videos. You can find us on Apple Podcast. Subscribe there. Give us those 5 stars and whatnot. Thumbs up. And you can find us on Spotify. However you may be listening, however you may be reaching out, I thank you. The interaction is much appreciated. With that, thanks for listening. Thanks for stopping by. And we'll catch you next time here on 305 Insights. Have a good one, folks.